Welcome to the second edition of Times Techies webinars. Times Techies is a page that we started about a year ago, and it was designed to bring the tech fraternity together in some sense, make them aware of others in the field, spot good talent, highlight opportunities, new trends. And from whatever feedback we've been getting, it's been a great response. We started this webinar series now. It's been the first edition happened last week. This is the second, and we have for you Sachin Gupta. Sachin is the co-founder and CEO of HackerEarth. HackerEarth is a global company that helps large enterprises remotely assess and interview developers based purely on coding skills. It is also a leading facilitator of online virtual hackathons and coding challenges, where its community of 4 million developers can upskill and practice for tech interviews. Sachin is a computer science graduate from IIT Roorkee. He then worked as a software developer at Google and Microsoft before he ventured out to build HackerEarth. At HackerEarth, he wears multiple hats. In the early days, he was directly involved in the product development and writing code. Currently, he leads the marketing team, overlooks the sales strategy, and drives the sales team. He's responsible for setting up the operations process and actively contributes to product management and strategy. Sachin is actually talking to us from Sunnyvale, you said, Sachin?
Yep.
Sunnyvale. So it's early morning there for him. Welcome, Sachin. Thanks a lot for being part of this. I know it's tough waking up so early, or maybe you're used to it. Now over to you, Sachin. Go ahead. The topic is, as we had mentioned earlier on our websites and all, top technical skills required for developers to be job ready in the post-COVID world. And I mean, in the media industry, all of us are acutely aware of the kind of problems of jobs that are happening.
Right.
Salary cuts, layoffs. The tech industry probably isn't as badly affected, but I think things are getting, I mean, I'm sure there are a lot of upskilling and reskilling that will be required, and Sachin is a great person to be talking about it. So Sachin, over to you.
Thanks, Sujit. Thanks for having me here. It's really exciting to be in front of the audience and talking about this topic, which is very current, and I think there is a lot of interesting avenues for developers today. You're right, there are a lot of layoffs and pay cuts that have happened, and overall we may not be in very good times, but I'm fairly positive about the things that are yet to come. So excited to be talking here, and thanks for the time. Yeah, it's a little early. I'm not a morning person, but it's always fun talking to people back home in India. So we are all living in unprecedented times. Many of us who entered this industry in the last one decade, which includes me, I graduated in 2012. We've mostly seen a period of rapid growth, and we have no clue how the market reacts when there is any kind of economic slowdown. Well, I'm not an expert to say whether there's going to be a recession, but it's very obvious that there is a global economic impact, which is not good. And then, if you look at the vast majority of us, none of us have seen a health pandemic, a medical pandemic of this scale ever, right? So it's obvious that a lot of us might be confused and apprehensive about what's happening as the industry is going to losses and we see people near us losing their jobs, right? So it is definitely a difficult time for a lot of people. And the topic of my discussion today would be to kind of talk about the macro picture, start with the macro picture, and then drill down into specifics from an individual developer's perspective, and kind of talk about what are the things that they can keep in mind as they navigate through this uncertainty. So I'm going to present, the flow is that I'll start with a brief presentation. Let me know, I'm going to share my screen. Let me know when you're able to see it. And then towards the second half of the discussion, we can go into the live Q&A.
Yeah, it's visible, Sachin.
Yeah. Okay. Like I said, I like to start with the macro economic scene. So if you look at it, these are the numbers from the UN, which says the monetary GDP losses in the best case COVID-19 scenario over the next 3 months alone is going to be a total of almost 77 billion USD. And if you look at job losses, they are expected to be about 195 million in next 3 months. Contrast that with what we saw the last. So this is the kind of figure in terms of job losses that we've seen over years in the past, which we're going to see in the next 3 months alone. So needless to say that the impact is significant. And it is going to create a significant, I would say, change in our economy, in our society. And the interesting thing is that this just reflects the numbers from segments which are actively covered and accounted for. We know that there's a vast majority of labor pool in developing economies and say countries like India, where a lot of these things are not even accounted for. So if all of that was taken into fray, the losses are actually going to be much, much higher. However, what is interesting is that the tech sector has been surprisingly resilient to the whole situation. So this is the technology sector SPDR stock performance over the last 12 months. And as you can see, there is clearly a dip that we saw in March, towards the end of March, but already we are on, we're nearing towards the end of May, and we are already at near the levels at which the stock performance was before before the COVID pandemic actually grew widespread. Now, obviously, stock performance is not necessarily reflective, a true reflection of what the market is going through. But the point I'm trying to make is that if we look at tech sector alone, there has been a significant, I would say, rebound that we have seen in a fairly short duration of time. But still, if we look at the industries, there are industries, there are sectors that are going to be very slow in their recovery. For instance, food and restaurant, travel, hospitality, leisure and arts, transport, construction, real estate, and retail are significantly hit. In fact, I would say in the first three sectors on the screen that you see on the screen, recovery could take as long as 2 years. I think the Airbnb founder was saying that travel is not going to resume or let's say business is not going to resume for them as late as the end of 2021. And same has been the sentiment in the airline industry. While on the other side, we have certain sectors which have been doing better and will see, are either already seeing quick recovery or will see quick recovery. So interestingly, healthcare and public administration has actually benefited. And that's, I don't mean to say it in the wrong sense, but these two sectors have seen rapid growth because of the COVID-19 pandemic, while the others are set to grow faster once this kind of, once business starts resuming. But what is interesting across all of these sectors is that as commerce starts to rebound, there is going to be a higher demand for technology roles, because the growth as well as recovery is going to be, is going to be basis technology in all of these sectors. So what's interesting has happened is that the digital transformation for a lot of industries have been fast-paced by this COVID-19 pandemic. A point in case being, we're all doing video calls and webinars, whereas so many of us were invested in doing events and visiting and meeting people in person, but all of that is now not possible. So a lot of businesses are already being forced to go digital, or they will have to go digital if they want to rebound, and hence technology will play a very key role in both the rebound as well as the subsequent growth of these sectors. So, while I understand that in the short term, many of us are impacted, most of us are going through pay cuts, and some unfortunate ones have also been laid off. In the long run, I'm optimistic about the growth in technology and the opportunities that is going to create. So, like I said, in the long run, we are bound to, things are bound to become better, while I do agree that in the short term, many of us may be affected. So if you're a developer out there and you're thinking about the career growth in these uncertain times, I would divide that into I would say two situations. So if you're the unfortunate one whose job has been negatively impacted in the current scenario, the first thing I'm going to say is hold your ground, don't be discouraged. While there may not be as many opportunities as there used to be probably 3 months back, there are still some good opportunities out there. And while it may take you a little bit longer to find an ideal job for yourself, you will eventually find good opportunities. So, and as soon as you get something, you got to go for it. So that's for the ones who are kind of negatively impacted. While on the other side, folks who are are fortunate not to be negatively impacted by the situation, I'd say this is a great time for you to hunker down and put in some solid projects in your I would say tech repertoire. We've seen at our own organization at HackerEarth that the pace of product development has significantly increased ever since the lockdown has happened. And that's a sentiment that I'm seeing, that I'm hearing across my friends in the startup ecosystem, and I'm sure it's the same in larger organizations as well. That most of us are doubling down on our product velocity, which means there is more interesting work to be done. And if you're sitting at home all day, what better way to spend your time than to productively be engaged at work? So if you're in that situation, now's the best time to invest in your skills, to invest time and effort into being better, more suited once things rebound. And as they say, when the seas are having a storm, and the seas are rough, fishermen mend their nets. What that basically means is, if you can't go out there and do your job as a fisherman, you stay back home and sharpen your tools. And that analogy will perfectly apply even in this scenario, that if, let's say, if you were looking to move on to a different role, a different opportunity, and you cannot do that today, that does not mean that you cannot spend time in reskilling and upskilling yourself. And that's going to be one of the key elements that I want to talk about in the discussion today. But for moving on, there are a few things that any developer should expect once things start going back to normal. So some of them are that, as I said earlier, the digital transformation has accelerated globally, which means that developers can expect new tech jobs coming from unconventional sources. So industries that were earlier slow to adopt technology are going to, they're being actually literally being forced to accelerate that, and they'll have to, we are going to see a lot more tech job being created in sectors, in segments that we were not seeing earlier. It's no brainer that the tech hiring process has changed. And in my opinion, it has changed for a fairly long time. Even when we do start going back to the offices, people will be slow to go back to your earlier interviewing process, which was very heavy on meeting people and spending a lot of time face to face. I would go out on a limb and say for the next 1 year or so at least, all interviews are going to be remote. And that, while it seems okay, I was doing an interview in person, but today I'm doing that on a video. While it may seem like a small change, there are certain nuances, there are certain things that people need to keep in mind while they are going through a virtual interviewing process. There are going to be changes both on the pre-screening and the assessment side. We'll see a lot of companies using digital assessment tools. Plus, as I said, as all interviews become remote, from a candidate's perspective, it's very important that you kind of are prepared to give your best performance while you go through these virtual interviews. With companies going remote, and this is my personal bet, that with companies going remote, they'll be a lot more open to hiring from different places. So up until now, if an organization was centered in headquartered in, say, Bangalore, they generally were more comfortable hiring people from Bangalore itself, because getting people to move from other parts of the country, while that's still an option, it does have its own challenges. People are not very flexible. Not all people are flexible to move. And hence, while we would still compete with talent at a national scale, I think the real competition in that sense was within your city. Now that's going to change. It's not just about an organization based in Bangalore hiring in Delhi, but I would say an organization based anywhere, hiring from anywhere in other parts of the country and even outside, right? Which means there is going to be a lot more competition, a bigger talent pool for organizations to dip into. Of course, not everybody is going to go completely remote, but I'm pretty sure that a lot of organizations will go partially remote, and hence they'll be open to hiring people from unconventional sources. And the last one is, and this particular trend, I wouldn't say has been significantly accelerated by COVID-19. That's something that's been happening for, I would say, for the last half a decade. And we've been, fortunate enough to be in the middle of it, and in some sense, kind of accelerating that trend. Is that with the increased demand for tech talent, new talent is already coming in from unconventional sources. We are seeing people who haven't even gone through a formal college education in computer science, competing with some of the best minds out there and actually beating them. So pedigree, which is both where you studied from and where you worked in the past, it already matters a lot less, and the significance is going to go down. And people will be open to hiring folks from different backgrounds. So again, which means yes, there is slightly more increased competition, but it's also overall good for the sector, because like I said, there is going to be more demand for tech roles, and hence the supply has to kind of match up to that. So if you're a developer and you're thinking about, hey, what are the things that I should be, what are the skills that I should be looking at? What are the tech jobs that are going to become more popular or already popular? This particular data, you'll find it of help. So it's a no-brainer that AI, machine learning engineer, data scientist, these roles have seen a massive uptake in the last, I would say, 4 or 5 years. So this data is from Career Karma and Indeed statistics, and you can see that for AI and machine learning engineer, there is a 344% growth in the number of jobs over the last 3 years, which is very reflective of the trend that we are already seeing, and this is only going to solidify in the future. In fact, even at HackerEarth, we've seen data science, machine learning become a vertical, a very significant vertical for us over the last few years. So we see a lot more organizations interested in doing hackathons, hiring contests, looking to hire data scientists. So that's one. The other domain is cybersecurity, and which can also be termed as information security analyst. So cybersec is the other domain which has grown significantly, and I think this whole transition to work from home, the whole transition to working remotely, poses its own set of security challenges for organizations, and hence they will have to invest. They would want to invest a little bit more in that. The other, are more talked about, so it's not really a surprise. Software engineer is the largest, is the most common job title, so that continues to be. But obviously, with the migration, with the movement to the cloud, roles like full stack developer, DevOps and cloud engineer, front end developer, and mobile app developer are becoming a lot more mainstream. While I agree, over a population, over a base of 4 or 5 million engineers in India, a large portion of them are still working on, I would say, some of the traditional tech stacks. I am seeing firsthand even larger organizations migrating to some of the newer tech stacks like Python, R for data science. Then we've got Node, React, Mongo, and some of the other stacks. They're migrating in 2 ways. The first is, for a lot of their newer projects, a lot of their, I would say, experimental projects, they are very open in adopting some of these new tech, and they want to leverage the power that the new technology gives them. While for their business as usual, they're slowly migrating their existing systems in traditional, conventional, I would say, tech background to some of the newer technologies. So if you're a developer looking to upskill, these are the roles that you should be thinking about. Now, if we contrast that with the sentiment on the developer side, so we recently ran a survey amongst, I think, about 16,000 developers all across the globe, and we kind of sought their opinion on few things. One of them was, what are the skills that developers are interested in learning? And as you can clearly see, data science stands out. So the HackerEarth survey showed that more than 63% of students and almost 61% of the working professionals want to develop data science skills. Followed by that is IoT, blockchain, cybersecurity, game dev, and so on. So data science kind of stands out in terms of both the demand from the employer as well as an aspiration from the end, I would say, employee to develop their skills on. So that kind of, with that I kind of segue into our one of the key messages that I want to give and talk about in this discussion today is the best way to make use of this slowdown is to invest in your skill development. And if you're out there as a developer thinking, hey, what do I do about it? Pick up a skill that you've always wanted to develop, and either pick up projects at work that give you exposure to skill development, or there is enough material out there for you to pick up and start learning. If anyone comes and tells me, hey, I don't know where to start in today's world, I think that's just an excuse. We've got enough free as well as paid content on the web. We've got enough opportunities to kind of apply our knowledge. And one thing that I've kind of learned by my own experience while building HackerEarth, and I've seen this across every developer, every good developer that I've come across, is all of them actually learn or develop their skills by doing, right? So computer science in particular is not a subject where you can just read content and develop skills. I haven't met any developer who said, hey, I became good at this just by taking up tutorials and doing courses. The most effective way to actually cement your knowledge or to perfect your knowledge is to apply it. And hence the pivotal thing that people need to keep in mind as they're thinking about improving their skills and being job ready once the post COVID-19 world is that you got to develop these skills by actually applying your knowledge. And there are three ways. So one is obviously you could apply that knowledge at work and invest your time in projects that help you build that expertise. But outside of work, there are three major activities that one can do. The first is, there are tons of online problem solving platforms, which are great for improving your fundamentals and at some level also for interview preparation. So, these are some of the platforms where you could go in, apply your skills, develop your skills around the core concepts of computer science, like algorithms, data structures, logic, problem solving, and so on. And, I cannot stress enough on that there is, the more you do, the better it is for you. Like, this is something, consider, you could consider problem solving like this almost like I would say mental exercise for your brain, and kind of keeping yourself on the toes when it comes to computer science. So you could be doing this all throughout your life, just to keep your mental faculties prepped up and toned when it comes to core problem solving. The second aspect is, the second thing that you could do is participate in contests and hackathons where you get to apply your skills on real world problems. So like I said earlier, you could read a lot of content. You could go there, watch videos, maybe even read books. But until and unless you apply your learning onto a real world problem and you actually build an end-to-end project, you will not be able to translate that theoretical knowledge into practical skills. And some of these hackathons or contests where you get to solve real world problems and work on projects in a short duration of time is a great way to quickly apply the skills that you've learned, and then use that to build out something real. And that, as I said, helps you solidify your learning. And the third way is, and I'm a person, this is one of my personal favorite, is by contributing to open source projects. In my opinion, the best way to learn about how professional software development is done is to be a contributor in a large open source project. Why I say large open source project is because there have to be enough peers out there working on that project who kind of enforce and teach you how to do professional software development. What I mean by professional software development is it's not just about writing code fast. It's also about writing good quality code that is maintainable, that your peers can contribute to, and code that continues to grow even if you're not involved in that project. And open source projects are, in that sense, truly open source, right? Anybody anywhere could start contributing, and hence the focus on ensuring good code writing practices is very high. So if you've been able to contribute to a large popular open source project, that's bound to teach you a lot. So these are three things or three tracks I would say one should keep in mind while they're thinking about how they upskill themselves. With that, changing gears a little bit, how do you really land your dream job? And there is enough material on this out there, so I'm going to share my perspective for what it's worth. The first thing this is my personal advice, and I'm speaking from probably having looked at what more than maybe 5-10,000 resumes, and having hired more than 500-600 people over the last 7-8 years at HackerEarth in total, is you got to stand out. There is too much noise out there. Let's be fair to let's be truthful to ourselves. Recruiters get tons of applications every day, right? And there is really no incentive for them to play favorites with you. So for you to kind of make the cut, you've got to stand out. If your resume is stuffed with all possible keywords and it runs across 2 or 3 pages, then without giving any insights about why the organization should actually be talking to you, then don't be surprised if you don't get a call, right? The onus of making sure that you stand out is on you. And but the good thing that is working in your advantage today is we are not weighed down. Maybe some of the organizations are, but a large majority of the organizations today are not weighed down by signals of pedigree. While maybe a decade ago, if you came from a university which was not an IIT or an NIT, you would have found it hard to land a job which compares with folks who've gone through IIT and IIT education system. But today, that's no more the case. I've seen people even without a college degree giving IITians a run for their money. And I say this very proudly. I'm a product of the IIT ecosystem, but I really believe in the potential of anybody who's sitting anywhere. As long as they're passionate about what they want to do, they can compete with anyone else out there. So, but yeah, of course, so your pedigree is not really, I would say, an impediment. But what you do need to do, obviously a pedigree does give you a head start. What you do need to do in order to compensate for the loss of that head start is have certain things in your profile that, as I said, stand out. How have you contributed to open source projects? How active are you on the in the online competitive programming scene? What's your score there? Do you have any ratings there? How have you participated in hackathons? Do you have like a side project that you contribute to? I would say have all of them. If not all of them, at least have one or two of them. And that should clearly stand out in your resume, in your profile, whenever you're reaching out to an organization. Right. So obviously, and I can talk in a lot more detail about this, but in the interest of time, I'll kind of move on from this particular topic. But the bottom line is, if you want to be heard, you need to stand out. And that the best way to do that is by demonstrating your skills in an objective and clear manner. The second is you need to have strong fundamentals. There is no going around the fact. It actually doesn't matter if you have a formal education in computer science, but it does matter how good you are at problem solving and logical thinking. What that means is, given a problem statement, how quickly or how efficiently you are able to break down that problem into smaller subproblems and think about all possible solution paths for that particular problem. And this is not in just the context of interviewing, and of course that helps. If you are able to do that effectively during an interview, it significantly increases your chances of getting through. But even when you're at work, when you're applying your skills, it's really about being able to conceptualize a solution and think of all possible solution paths before you commit to one particular strategy. And for that, having strong fundamentals is important. And that brings, strong fundamentals in computer science stem from a very thorough knowledge of the concepts of algorithms and data structures. So while you may not be implementing a lot of these algorithms and data structures at work, understanding how they work and having a strong knowledge of these is critical. So a pro tip, while you're going through these interviews is, it's quite likely that you get asked a question in your interview that you've already solved during your practice. My suggestion is, don't just jump into the question right away. It's not about writing code right away. Instead, it's about telling the interviewer, talking to the interviewer and telling them about how you're thinking about approaching the problem. What is your plan to, how do you go about solving this? What are the various solution paths that you've considered? And then kind of communicating and articulating to that. In fact, writing code should be the last thing you do, both in an interview as well as in your real life. Another thing to keep in mind is when you're using high-level programming languages like Python, and with where complex data structures are available natively, while you may use them to answer questions, it's important that you know about the underlying implementation. So you could use all of these high-level constructs. That's not a problem. But if you do not understand how it works, then you kind of it will come through in your interview. The next is you got to prepare for your interviews. You cannot just wing it. Tech interviews are probably the hardest to kind of go through. There is, in almost all organizations, there are at least 4 to 5 different rounds, sometimes all of them on the same day, covering over a vast variety of topics. Most of them, I think about out of 4, if you're going through 4 interviews, at least 3 of them would involve you writing code. So it's important that you prepare for your interviews. And some of the things that you should keep in mind while you're practicing and preparing for interviews is develop the skill of exploring multiple solutions for a given problem. Like I said earlier, it's not about landing on the most optimized solution in the first attempt, but it's about, have you thought through all possible solutions while you arrive at that. You should also be comfortable with time constraints. A lot of us are great at coming up with a solution, but we may not perform, we may not perform with the same efficiency when we have a timer running on our head. But unfortunately, that's the nature of interviews. In the context of remote hiring and everything going virtual, that's another element that I want to touch upon is in a face-to-face scenario, there is a lot of body language that gets exchanged. Your interviewer is observing you very keenly. They're able to understand, what are you thinking? Are you stuck? And it's more of a conversation. But the same environment which exists in a face-to-face interview cannot be replicated in a video call. And hence, like I said, you may think it's trivial, but as a candidate, you need to spend more time in kind of making sure that you're well prepared for these interviews and you're able to connect and talk to your interviewer during a video interview. The other thing is understanding the question is the most important aspect of your interview. As they say, if you are able to deconstruct the problem statement, that's like half your solution. So spend enough time or develop practice so that you get into a habit of quickly being able to understand what the question is about. And lastly, for your system design interviews, as goes for your coding interviews, practice. It is like super critical, and I'm going to touch upon that a little bit now. But you should have spent enough time practicing for your interviews, both when it comes to coding rounds as well as your interviewing system design rounds. So some of the mistakes to avoid during the interviews, like I said, don't directly jump to writing code. For design questions, don't get confused between the high-level architecture versus the low-level design. Clearly talk about both these components so that your interviewer understands what's your high-level architecture and what's the low-level code design that you're going to implement. Don't be intimidated if you're not able to think through an answer. Consider the interview more of a conversation. Collaborate with the interviewer. In most of the cases, interviewers are open to giving hints and working with you. They're more interested in knowing how do you think and how do you arrive at a solution. And lastly, of course, be conscious of time. Interviewers want to cover at least 2 to 3 questions in an interview. Sometimes, there are lesser, but at least 2. So at times, moving on is better than getting stuck. And last, as you kind of prepare for your next role, either now or post COVID-19, the last thing that I would say is it's very important to start ahead of time. A good interview preparation can take up to 3 to 6 months of practice. I would say, 3 months if you are being aggressive, and 6 months if you're looking for jobs at a leisure pace. I would broadly break down that into 3 segments. The first is brushing up on your programming fundamentals even before you start preparing or practicing for your interviews. That would be month 1. Month 2 to 3 would be practicing programming questions, and there are tons of platforms that you can do it online. And the third aspect would be working on your system design skills. So the second will help you cover the coding rounds. The third would help you cover the architectural rounds, and that would happen in the month 3 and 4. From brushing up your fundamentals, there are enough resources out there. We have a practice section. There's content on Geeks for Geeks. There is cracking the coding interview. It's important that you cover all the topics that you're rusty on. As software developers, as we grow, we kind of start focusing on certain aspects of computer science, but there are certain other things that we may not have worked on a fairly long time. So it's important to first prioritize those and kind of brush up your fundamentals. I cannot stress enough on practice. There is, I would say, you could, as much practice as you could do, please do that. There are two things that you should keep in mind. One is you should aim at covering all topics. So there are, I think, about 10 to 15 different topics that typically get covered in interviews, and eventually at your job as well, you need knowledge of those concepts. So make sure you cover all of them, and aim to solve at least 100 to 150 to 200 questions across different difficulty levels. May sound a lot. It is actually a lot, and hence it requires at least 2 months of dedicated focus on solving problems. And the last is, as I said, working on your system design skills. And here it's not just about reading content. It's not just about, say, reading how a URL shortening service, say, for example, Bitly is built, but it's also about really understanding what that means. What does system design mean? What are the various components? And this as a skill is going to be extremely important or extremely useful for you as you grow in your career, because you slowly go away from writing code on a day-to-day basis to designing systems. So the sooner you start investing in this skill, the better. So I'm kind of coming towards the end of my presentation, and I want to kind of talk about a little bit on the positive side, that while, like I said in the earlier, I do understand some of you may be going through job losses, but there are people who are still hiring. Most of the large tech organizations are hiring. In fact, some of them have even accelerated their hiring because they understand now is a good time to hire better people or smarter people. There are still startups who are getting funded, and those who have growth capital are still hiring. And there are various initiatives that have been launched by different platforms. We've done something, Naukri has something, Accenture has, which is trying to place people who've kind of lost their jobs because of this unfortunate situation. I'll end the presentation by talking about some of the resources that I regularly tap into to keep myself up to date with tech. Hacker News is a great platform for for you to read tons of interesting tech updates. One simple trick is follow the Twitter handle, and if you're active on Twitter, you'll get a curated list of content to read. HackerNoon and highscalability.com are another blog, two blogs where you can follow and get interesting content. And then, we've recently started a Breaking 404 a podcast series, which is with amazing engineering leaders across the globe, and that can give you some insights on things that you should focus on as you plan your career growth. So, with that, I kind of come to the end of my presentation. I would like to now open up to questions and have a more free-flowing discussion.
Thank you so much, Sachin. These are exactly the kind of topics that we can track what stories are read on the page and all of that. And I can tell you, skilling, learning, all the subjects that you touched on are what our readers and viewers tend to see the most. I'm sorry, I should have mentioned earlier that my colleague Shilpa is also with me. And now we'll ask you a few questions. You'll also take questions from the viewers. So you had this slide on the top tech jobs.
Right.
And I mean, AI machine learning was, of course, the number one with some 344% growth. I wanted to ask you, these would be from your global database. Would it be somewhat similar for India, or are there some specific India-specific trends?
I would say the trends are kind of same in India as well. So I wouldn't say there is a significant difference. There might be, few roles, for example, full stack development, and I would say front end would maybe a couple of notches higher in India, but data science still dominates as the top leader when it comes to India specific trends.
Okay. Shilpa?
From your presentation, Sachin, you spoke about how data science is the in thing. For those developers who are focused largely on software development, how do you think they can gain proficiency in terms of data science? If you can take us through what are the future opportunities?
Right, that's a great question, Shilpa. Thanks for putting that through. And yes, we do get asked that question a lot. So the thing about data science is that it's an interdisciplinary subject. It touches upon various aspects. For example, to be a good data science or ML engineer, you've got to have knowledge of the following five things. The first is your computer science fundamentals have to be strong. So anything that you would do as a as a software developer, you've got to learn, maybe not the whole 9 yards, but you need to have some skills on your computer science fundamentals. The second is you've got to have a knowledge of probability, statistics, and maths. So either you come from that background or you've got to spend time developing that. The third is you've got to have skills on data modeling. Basically, you should be comfortable in understanding various data models, how to play around with that, how to operate with data, how to manage data. And Python and R are obviously two languages of choice when it comes to data science, and they have tons of tools and utilities that help you do data modeling. So one has to spend enough time developing expertise on that. The fourth is there are tons of ML algorithms. So these are like, these are algorithms that you would not use in your day-to-day software development life, which are very specific to machine learning. While you don't have to implement these algorithms, but you've got to know where to apply them. So having an ingrained knowledge of what does an algorithm do, where can it be applied, what are the various contexts, that will help you pick and choose the right tools when you're building out an end system. And the last one is kind of dependent on the industry, but a data scientist always operates in a context. If you are into retail, then the context is, let's say we're talking about you building a recommendation engine for a shopping website. The context is how do what are the data points that one should be looking at? There is browsing history, there is past purchases, there are shopping carts that didn't go through. So you should be able to understand what a business context is and then apply machine learning to that. So those are the five things that one needs to look
at. Sachin, from where we sit, at least, the startup ecosystem seems to be quite rattled by the pandemic.
Right.
Funding looks like it's going to dry up a lot. Startups otherwise have been a great learning opportunity for developers and engineers and all of that. What do you think? What is your advice to developers? Do you think they should still focus on jobs in startups, or should they focus on the more established companies?
Right. So I'm a founder, and obviously asking this question to a founder is you're going to get a biased response. In my own personal career, everything that I've learned is because of what I've done at HackerEarth. So for me, it's very hard to recommend someone not to work in a startup precisely because of that reason, like you mentioned. It's a great opportunity for someone to very quickly develop skills, get exposed to a lot of things. So I would say, in the first 10-15 years of your career, you should have spent at least 5 to 6 years in a startup, both in early stage as well as a high growth stage, because it gives you that perspective, right? But I do understand where you're coming from. There is at an individual level, there's also an element of job security, stability, right? So I think it's for the people to weigh and balance. I wouldn't lean towards any one of them. Look at where you are in terms of your career. Of course, you've got to be wise. There are startups out there today who are still getting funded, maybe not as many as what we were seeing 3 months back. And there are startups who have enough, either they have enough funding in the past, or a lot of them have also built business momentum, right? They're self-sustainable. So pick wisely when you're going through that interview process, understand what the status of the economic condition of the organization is. And if you think that's a role that will add to your career, I would still say go for it. But if you are in a phase where, you want some stability, you're not too aggressive at this point in time, you could always go into a larger organization as well. But the startup, the founder in me will always lean towards the startup role.
Sachin, you spoke about how it is very important to stand out from the noise and help just polish your profile so that recruiters notice them. So what are some of the things that's on the list?
Yeah. So like I covered in the presentation as well, few things that you could do is have a profile on the online coding platforms where, you've participated, you've solved problems, and it kind of stands out, right? Now, of course, that doesn't mean that's the only thing that you do, but if you have invested time in developing your skills on the core concepts of computer science, and you can demonstrate that by your online profiles, recruiters or hiring managers give that some importance. You could also be very active in the hackathons and the online coding contest. If you're, say, a data scientist, definitely participate in an ML contest, aspiring data scientist or an established one, because that shows that you have spent time building out a real world project. You've taken up a problem, spent a couple of weeks and worked on it. So even if you've not done anything on data science in your regular day-to-day job, maybe because you didn't get an opportunity and you want to transition into data science, having participated in such hackathons gives your prospective employer a proof point that you have those skills, right? It's all about showing what the skills are. And then finally, as I said, contributing to open source projects is another great way, because it is reflective of that you have sound professional software development skills. So these are three things that I would recommend: participate in online coding platforms, build a profile there, participate in hackathons and again coding contests, and then finally contribute to open source. This is obviously outside of work. If you have done interesting things at your work and you can very clearly articulate about that in terms of projects, that's also great.
Sachin, I know you kind of answered it in one of the previous questions, but still this comes from a viewer, so I'm asking again. What specific technical skills or coding languages are required for an entry-level AI ML engineer? How is coding for AI ML projects different from regular development?
Right. So coding for AI ML work requires you to have knowledge of constructs which you may not use in your regular software development. So when I say constructs, I'm talking about ML algorithms. I'm talking about ability to work with various data models. And while you could build those skills in any programming language today, obviously, Python and R are clear winners, because if you look at R as a programming language, that was built grounds up for data modeling and statistics. So all the constructs of statistics and data modeling are built into it. And Python, because of its, it's a fairly mature language and has very active open source contributions. A lot of libraries like, scikit-learn, pandas, NumPy, Google TensorFlow, a lot of them are built into Python, which allows you to apply those machine learning models and data modeling constructs. So developing skills in either of these, you could pick either R or Python, and then focusing on data science concepts is important. Julia is another programming language which is seeing a lot of adoption in the data science community.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Actually, outside the regular coding challenges, a lot of developers want to tap into the developer community. They want to network and also seek mentoring. What is the best way to really reach out to a mentor?
Right. So there are a couple of things that one could do. The first is, and may sound a little counterintuitive, but I think cold outreach still works. I've done that throughout my life. If you feel that there is someone out there who you follow as a mentor, who you kind of respect, just shoot out an email to them or reach them out on Twitter, on LinkedIn. A well-crafted message, which is well-intentioned, where you really want to seek some guidance and you're not just doing it for the sake of doing it. 9 out of 10 times people respond, right? They'll either respond by saying, hey, I don't have time, or they'll say, okay, let's talk. So that's one. Identify mentors in the industry who you follow and then reach out to them. The second could be, participating on these various online platforms. So for example, if you're participating in a hackathon on HackerEarth or anywhere for that matter, there are two things you could do. One is you get to meet other people, like-minded people who are interested in that domain. So your fellow participants are also interested in that, either the technology domain or the industry domain. So you get to network with them. And now these virtual hackathons and events are even more relevant, because one cannot go to developer conferences and do that. The second thing that it allows you to do is also get in front of industry experts. So typically hackathons nowadays have mentor sessions. They have industry leaders, kind of doing webinars and talking about things, and that's your opportunity to get in front of them, right? So typically the problem is access. How do I get in front of this person, and hence the person would be able to give me some time. So imagine you went through a hackathon, you built a project, you're one of the winning teams or in the top 10, and now if you reach out to the person who mentored you during the hackathon, they're more likely to respond to you, right? So participating in such online communities would kind of help.
There's a question from viewer Sanjay Chauhan. Will quality assurance software testing as a profession survive in the future? software testing in quality assurance. What skills and certifications for QA professionals do you suggest to stay relevant?
Got it. So great question. So I think quality as a profession will continue to be there. What we've already seen is a lot of automation. So earlier, a lot of QA roles would be reliant and still are on manual testing. While I don't think manual testing is going to go away, because at the end of the day, a machine today at least is not as smart as a human to be able to identify all possible corner cases. But increasingly, there is a focus on automating things, right? Can I build systems? So QA engineers today are not just kind of testing systems on their own, but they're also writing scripts, building models, in some cases even using data science to test, create these systems that help them to test not only their application at that instance, but kind of create a continuous testing infrastructure. So even if we've done a lot of interesting work at HackerEarth, where the QA team is now responsible not only for the quality assurance, but also release, build, and the entire process. So right from as soon as a feature comes into staging till it goes into production is kind of managed by the QA team. So that's where you can you could grow. So the skills that one should focus is on. By the way, I'm not a great fan of certifications. For me, it's about having applied those skills. That's more important. Show me something that validates that project. Don't show me a skill certificate, because there are like 100 ways to get a skill certificate. But if you've actually built a scripting system, so there are certain scripting languages like Python, Bash, which are used commonly. There are tools like Selenium. There are stress testing tools which are used. So one can, and all of this information is fairly easily available. So developing an understanding of programming scripting languages, that's one. And second, developing an understanding of testing tools, both on the front end like a Selenium, or on the back end, which allows you to do stress testing and say various smoke testing and other kind of testing things, would be a good thing for people to invest in. And this profession is going to stay. It's just going to become more programming driven.
Any more questions?
I think
Yes, Aman Kapoor, there's a question. Is the demand for mobile app development expected to increase in the near future? Should we focus on specific technical skills for mobile development?
Right. So see, mobile is like it's a form factor that everybody uses today. Most of the platform, most of the system solutions end up having a mobile version, right? Gone are the days when you would only launch it for web. Of course, there are a lot of tools which are mobile first as well. From a demand perspective, the trend of people moving to mobile is already a reality, right? So if you had asked me this question 5 years back, then yes, we were seeing a massive increase because a lot of tools or systems were not on mobile and then they were migrating. Today, people kind of build mobile as a strategy from day one. So are we going to see an increase in demand? It will grow at its own pace. If you looked at the skills that I put, top tech roles that I put, I think mobile development is kind of growing at about 10-15% year on year. So that regular growth will continue to be there, but we're not expected to see a massive growth. Now, coming to the tools and technologies, yes, that's a constantly evolving spectrum. So in the recent past, I've seen React Native being I would say a framework of choice for a lot of companies when they're thinking about their mobile strategy. So anybody who is interested in mobile app development, I would say there will be enough opportunities. Don't worry about that, and just focus on building out core programming skills on that front.
I don't know if Shilpa was having power issues in her house.
Yeah.
There are some more questions from the audience. Vijay Kumar and Karthik. Vijay is in QA and Karthik has been in a BPO operations role for the past few years. Is it possible for them to shift to development by learning mean stack, things like Node.js?
Right.
I don't understand some of these things myself.
That's perfectly okay. So there are two parts to the answer. The first is, and I'm just reading into it on my own. The first is, can I move, if I've been in a BPO industry, can I move to a programming role, tech role? Absolutely, yes. Is it going to be easy? No. It's going to take a lot of hard work, a lot of practice, a lot of focus on building out your skills. Probably finding your first job is going to be hard because, like I said, you have very little proof points to show that, okay, this is something that you could do. And hence your practice and learning and the time you spend doing things becomes relevant, right? So if you want to go into programming as a role, you've got to spend your time on all of these platforms that we touched upon and build out a profile. But even then, you've not worked in it. So it's going to be a little bit hard, but there are enough examples. We've seen that in our organization elsewhere, people who were not even into, remotely related to coding kind of roles moving into software development. So it's possible. Now, coming onto the stack, mean stack is popular these days. Yes, it's a choice, a stack of a choice for a lot of organization. And yes, if you're starting with that, then it gives you an immediate opportunity into some of the roles. But my personal take on stacks is that tech stacks will come and go. What's in popularity, what's popular today may not be popular 5 years down the line. So one has to obviously capitalize on the current trend, see what's trending today, and mean stack is one of them, but also at the same time ensure that you are developing your skills at a fundamental level. What happens in the industry tomorrow if mean stack is outdated? If your organization decides to move from Mongo and Node.js to some other framework, how quickly can you learn and adapt? That's key, right? And that only happens when you've invested enough time in building on your fundamental skills. So focus on that, pick a stack to begin with. Obviously you've got to start somewhere, but then be open to learning more as you progress in your career.
So fundamentals, what are the fundamentals like what?
So fundamentals of computer science in general, like I said in the earlier in the presentation, given a problem statement, are you able to deconstruct that into smaller problem statements and come up with multiple alternative solution paths?
Okay.
What do you know about algorithms, data structures? How do you know how computer systems work? What is a web application? What happens at the network layer? So focus on understanding what am I doing, and spend enough time practicing and writing code, and eventually you will build that expertise.
Okay. Shilpa, are you there?
Yeah. Sorry, I just got some network issue.
Okay.
Sachin, one question. What do you expect from a prospective recruiter who's offering you a remote tech role? What are some of the things that you really need to consider before taking up such an opportunity if it's a full-time remote working role?
Great question, Shilpa. I think all of us have kind of experienced what it means to work remotely. And I can, go out on a limb and say 95% of people out there in India are not enjoying it, right? Humans are social animals, right? We love being near other people. We love that social interaction. And hence remote roles come with their own set of challenges. So if you're getting offered a remote role in tech or otherwise, a few things that you need to keep in mind is, you have to be fully bought into that. Yes, I want to work remotely, right? Because there are a few challenges that you're going to face once you're into remote role. The first is communication. If you're behind a computer screen and a lot of other people are at office, it is possible to, not be part of that communication or kind of get sidelined. So I cannot stress upon over communication. I spent some time with a couple of folks here in the US who are working in organizations which are fully remote. And you won't believe that they spend a lot of time at the screening stage itself to test for communication skills of the person. Even in tech roles, they ask you to fill out 10 to 15 questions and write subjective responses because they want to see how can you communicate in a remote environment. So communication is key. You've got to make sure the organization is committed to over communicating and you are committed to over communicating. The second thing is discipline. It is very easy for your work and personal life boundaries getting blurred when you're at home all day. You get out of bed, go to your work screen, and then go back to bed, right? You don't want to be in that scenario. You want to have a work desk, and you need to have your dedicated working hours. So discipline is super important, not only from the point of view of you overworking, but also from your work environment, right? So at office, you're naturally available all the time whenever you're at office. But at home, it's easy to kind of turn that off and then go do something else. What if your colleague depends on you at that point, right? So having that discipline is important. And lastly, you've got to figure out a way to create social balance. So if you're not going to office and not getting the social interaction, you've got to compensate for that elsewhere. So you need to have a friend ecosystem, family, that keeps you engaged. If you're a bachelor living in Bangalore in HSR layout, not staying with someone and working remotely, I don't recommend that.
Okay, sure. The question from Samuel Kenneth, what is the most important aspect in a software engineering job?
Okay, so I would say there are various stages of software engineering as a career. There is early, mid, and late, and hence each one of them has its own requirements and challenges. But one thing that kind of cuts across all through them is, and I touched upon this briefly earlier as well, is learnability. The pace at which technology is changing today is mind-boggling, right? We started with a certain tech infrastructure 5-6 years back, and we are in the process of completely rehauling it, right? And I'm sure this happens everywhere. Every 3 years, I think, when I was at Google, one of my mentors told me, you got to rewrite your code every 3 years, right? So you should have a very high learnability quotient, which means whatever challenges the work or the world throws at you from a tech skills perspective, you can very quickly adapt to it and develop that. So if one can develop that ability to learn quickly, I think they're going to go a long way. The second aspect would be, I would again, and I've touched upon this multiple times because I think it's extremely important, is problem solving, and problem solving in a very broad sense. When your manager comes to you and gives you a task, what goes in your mind? Are you able to question the person back and say, hey, okay, what happens in this scenario, what happens in that scenario, why are we doing this, why are we doing that, right? And that also kind of relates to learnability. That curiosity element is super important. So exploring the problem further and then thinking of all possible solutions is key. Writing code is, I would say, only 30-40% of being a software engineer. A lot of work gets done before that. Deconstructing the problem, coming up with a good solution, architecture, working with your peers, seeking feedback and asking them, is this the right thing to do, and then implementing it. So I think that is something that people should develop as a skill. I know it's a soft skill. I'm not saying go learn Python, because I can't advocate that, right? Tomorrow, Python is not in trend. You don't need Python as a programming language skill, but this will always be there as a requirement.
Yeah, running out of time, but Shilpa, any more questions? We have questions, of course.
So
Shilpa,
yeah, I think one question from Chaitra Suresh. She wants to know if a developer is appearing for a remote in a remote interview, what are some of the things to watch out for, and what are the expectations from the recruiter?
Right. So yeah, great one. And I, kind of talked about being very conscious of remote interviews. So a few things that one can keep in mind is, like I said, when you are in a face-to-face interview, there is a body language, there is a natural interaction that's happening between you and the interviewer. That's kind of poor in a video interview, right? So and it's easy to get distracted, right? For all you know, I could be like doing something on my mobile while you're talking during an interview, and you don't want that. You want both the candidate and the interviewer to be engaged. So one has to spend enough, conscious time and effort to engage with the interviewers. Some simple things like turn on your video. Always turn on your video, right? Don't be doing just audio. Dress as if you're doing the interview in person, right? You cannot be in your regular t-shirt. You've got to feel that you're going into that interview mode. Have a clear working desk where you are sitting, no distractions. Make sure your tech works. The last thing you want to do in an interview is that your webcam doesn't operate or you're not able to log in, right? You're losing time. Then get rid of all distractions. Close your browser windows, turn off your phone, and be really focused into that interview. And the last thing I would say is interact, right? And this applies even to face-to-face interviews, but it's a conversation. An interview is not a monologue. It's about you and the interviewer talking about things. The interviewer is constantly assessing you. So you need to have that conversation on video. And hence, if you've never done a video interview before, it could be a little difficult. So get your friends to spend some time with you, do a couple of mock interviews, and then go in for an actual remote interview.
Do you have time, Sachin? We have slightly exceeded.
Yep. That's okay. We can
take some more questions. Yeah, we can. Okay. Yeah. Okay. This is from Aniket Srivastava. I'm not sure. I have not fully understood myself, but see if you can. How to remain updated with employable skills of data structure and algorithms when I'm already in a tech role and looking to move to a different company? I have observed that a lot of algorithms used for recruitment are not used on the job.
Right. So I got the question. The person is asking how to remain up to date with algorithms and data structures. So the thing is, algorithms and data structure is a core concept which is not evolving at a pace such that every 4 months, 5 months, you're getting a new algorithm or a data structure. In fact, whatever research work is being done is mostly in the field of either quantum computing or such I would say esoteric fields which have today have little applicability in your day-to-day role. So it's not about being current, but it's about being sharp, right? So like the person said, a lot of data structures that get asked questions, algorithms data structures that get asked in interviews may not be applied at work. And you're right. The audience will understand that nobody is going to ask you to implement a sorting function. Most of the libraries in all your languages have that pre-built, right? So one would ask, why do I need to know how does a sorting function work? You need to know because it's a building block, right? It's something that if you have understood at a granular level how to implement a sorting function in C, it not only tells you how sorting functions work, but it also tells you about what is the implementation in C, what are the various constructs that you can use there. And hence it helps you develop a stronger understanding and do a better job at your other things, right? So while you'll still use that off-the-shelf library function at work, having that understanding builds your fundamentals, and goes back to that same earlier point that I made, core programming skills. So how do you keep current and updated is, like I said, I believe like solving problems like these is gymming for your mind, right? Like you go to gym and tone up your physical body every, whatever frequency. At the same frequency, one should do it for their programming skills. A frequency of, even solving one problem a week is good enough because it flexes your muscles and keeps you up to those. So it's not about new concepts. It's about making sure whatever knowledge you have, it stays current. And that gets applied in your day-to-day work without even you getting to know it.
Shilpa?
One question from Kenneth. Are DevOps roles good for a long-term, to pursue as a long-term career path?
Absolutely. I would say it's a great domain to specialize in. So cloud is omnipotent. It's everywhere. Even large organizations are in very large pockets have already migrated to cloud. And the whole construct of DevOps came into perspective because of cloud. So before cloud, everything was, you were like system administrator because you had your machines and servers locally located. But now with cloud, and in fact, companies looking at multi-cloud solutions, there are a lot of, I would say, challenges that get in front of companies on a day-to-day basis. If you just look at AWS, for instance, I think probably when they started 15 years back, AWS had about 5-10 services. Maybe they had EC2, which is for your compute, and S3 for storage, and RDS for database. Today, they have 153 services. That's how complex that ecosystem has become. And of course, complex doesn't mean bad. It just means more powerful, which means AWS allows you to do a lot of things out of the box without you having to write your, having to do it at your own place from grounds up. So it's like a modularization and use freely available things. So hence, it is becoming increasingly difficult for organizations to build an infrastructure on cloud that is scalable and reliable. And that's where the DevOps as a function comes into picture. So it's not about turning servers on and off on AWS or Azure for that matter. It's about creating a continuous delivery pipeline. It's about monitoring your systems. It's about scaling your systems. And in my opinion, that's very interesting work. So anybody who's investing in DevOps, you are headed in the right direction.
Sachin, we have one question. Atmaja Sahu, which technologies related to mobile development are going to be in demand in the near future? X, Flutter, React Native, or native mobile development?
So purely basis on the popularity of the frameworks that at least we've come across in terms of employers seeking developers, React Native out of the three kind of is at the top today, because a lot of organizations have started adopting React Native as a framework, and hence might be relevant to invest in that. But then again, frameworks come and go. it's always good to be a jack of, I would say, if not a lot, but at least a few trades, right? So don't be narrow jacketed in that sense. While React Native may be popular today, it's always good to dabble in some of these other frameworks on your side projects, right? So if you've done a side project, out of a hobby project on, say, Flutter, then you can always tell prospective employers that I not only know React Native, but I also know Flutter, and it increases your opportunities.
Okay. Shilpa, are there any more?
No more questions.
Okay. Well, one question from my, people in their 40s and 50s, getting laid off and all that. When you talk to them, they say, "Listen, we are also learning. It's not like we stopped learning. We are learning all the time, and we know some of these newer things ourselves." But is there generally a age bias in companies?
Well, that's a very interesting question. And, I do know for a fact that there is a age bias in tech here in the US. So because of a lot of young folks coming into the sector in the last 10 years, and, young people come with their own, I would say, benefits, and then there are downsides as well. A lot of raw, passionate energy, getting things done, willingness to stay awake all night, churn thousands of lines of code. But age has its own merits, right? Experience, gray hairs, as they say, have its own merit, and that gives you that stability and that, I would say, ability to stop and say, okay, what is the solution I'm going to implement, right? I'll write code later. That kind of maturity you don't see in younger talent, but purely because of the large volume that we have of young folks coming in. So this industry is heavy on the young curve, right? A lot of people are now going into computer science, and hence we do see that age bias. I don't think that age bias is that much in India, because frankly, the ecosystem is relatively younger. So people here in the US started coding probably in their 70s, 80s, right? In India, we only start seeing IT as a profession, I would say, late 90s. So a lot of people are yet to go into that age bracket where they might see some sort of ageism, as they call it in tech. But it's a real problem, right? And one has to be mindful of that. Not that acute in India yet.
Okay. Sachin, thanks so much. It was wonderful listening to you. We learned a lot ourselves. And like I said before, these are exactly the kind of topics that our audience is very interested in. So thanks again. Sorry for waking you up very early in the morning.
No.
Wonderful. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks for the opportunity. I really enjoyed having this discussion, and I hope the audience found it relevant.
Yeah, I'm sure they did. And to the audience, in case there are more questions, do send us. We'll see if Sachin will.
Happy to
mail it to Sachin, and hopefully he'll reply. Yeah. I'm sure he will. Thanks so much. Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you, Sachin. Thanks for your time. Bye.